So how much money exactly are you supposed to save up before you go ahead, you try to find an apartment and you try to move out of your parents' house? Now, in reality, I moved out about 2 years ago. I've lived so far in 2 different apartments, so 2 different leases. And on top of that, I bought my own house just recently, meaning I actually own a home. Now, I've learned a lot of things from moving to expenses to basically the good things to do and not the good things to do. I made a few mistakes also that I want to share with you guys that we can basically avoid it. Now, as always, guys, like this video on top of also subscribe and hit the bell so you get notified. Now, the very first thing, guys, is I'm going to give you some advice you probably never heard before, but consider not moving out. And here's why I'm saying this, because I didn't turn 18 and I was like, well, I'm 18, I'm moving out, bye, peace out, mom. It wasn't like that, okay? I took my time moving out. I moved out at about 23 years old, and I did it for a few reasons. First of all, I wanted to have my income stabilized. I wanted to have some money saved up, and I wanted to have a good financial situation going on, okay? And I know, for example, and by the way, there's this last thing, okay? There's this feeling of just like I no longer want to be at home anymore. Not in the sense of like, oh, I'm too big, I'm too mature, I don't want to tell anybody what time I'm coming home, I want to do whatever I want, whatever I want. No, it's not that. It's more of just like, once you have income stability, you have your finances correctly, you feel like, oh my gosh, like I'm ready. You just feel kind of uncomfortable and you just kind of like want to go out there and explore. I felt that feeling, and I know it was actually time to actually go. So I did not move out because of, for example, I want to do my own thing, I want to stay up at night, whatever. It wasn't that. I focused on building up my foundation first. Now, I got this advice from my counselor. I had a counselor back in high school, and I told him when I was in 12th grade, the minute I turned 18, I'm moving out. He was like, don't do that. That's stupid, because moving out is super expensive. You should take full advantage of staying at home, give your parents some money, but use the rest of the money you actually earn from work and whatever to basically pay off your student loan debt, pay off your debt overall, build a good foundation, have some savings. So when you do move out, you don't have to worry that much, okay? Now, I have friends that moved out basically, and it's been like a struggle for them. Like, they moved out before they were ready. They barely have any savings. They lost their job. They're like, oh my gosh. And the last thing I wanted to do was move out and then have to move back in, because I felt that would have been very embarrassing. Now, it's not to say, things happen to people all the time, but I want to be prepared so I don't have to go through that. Now, last tip here, before I go into the details of whatever it costs or whatever, okay? Make sure you don't wait until you are 100% ready, because you never will be 100% ready. And don't wait until it makes 100% sense, because it won't make 100% sense. It makes no sense to leave somewhere where you pay like a few dollars to go pay for everything on your own, okay? Because it makes no sense. But it does something for you as a man, as a woman, to go ahead and live on your own and experience things, okay? So that's awesome stuff. Awesome sauce. Hope that helps you. Don't be too much in a hurry to go ahead and move out, because that's just stupid. So don't do that, okay? Now, here are the actual costs when it actually comes to moving out. And by the way, remember, credit is a factor. It is, but it's not the only factor. The most important factor that a landlord cares about is for you to have income and to have stable income. So when you go to them and say, hey, here are my pay stubs for an entire year or 6 months. Usually it's a lot less than that. They don't require that much, like maybe 4 or 6. But having, for example, stable income, it shows them, hey, you're going to be able to pay off the bills. And on top of that, if you don't have that much debt and basically obligations to your income, the answer is that's awesome, because it shows them you're actually able to cover all the expenses, and that's what they really do care about. So credit is a factor. More than anything, income stability is the biggest factor overall. Now, here are the core expenses, and I'm going to go over them with you guys right now. So I actually wrote everything down right here on my phone. Now, the first thing is you have, for example, application fees. Now, they might be between $20, $30, $40, but just try to budget like 80 bucks just in case, because it's better to have more than not to have enough. Now, you also have, for example, a security deposit. Usually it's about just a month, and you usually get that back at the end of the lease. Now, here's a little secret, okay? Some landlords never have any intention of actually returning that money back to you. For example, I rented out an apartment, and this lady just had a history of like never returning the deposit, because her idea was she always found something that was wrong with something and said, I'm gonna have to use the money on this, okay? So be careful. My advice would be, when I was looking for my first apartment, I was willing to pay down 2 months deposit, just trying to do everything I could, but just look for a reasonable space, do the minimum stuff, and don't go too overboard because you're super excited, okay? Be patient when looking for a place, because if you basically give someone 2 months, some people will take advantage and say, hey, this security deposit is to make sure if you do any damage to the property, we will fix it. And guess what? There is damage because they make it up sometimes. So be careful giving too much deposit, okay? Then you have, for example, first and last month's rent, but usually I didn't have to pay this at all. But you know, the first month's rent, last month rent, it really does depend, for example, on the landlord and the situation, but you have to budget for that. If in the area you're basically looking for it, they usually use that type of tradition, okay? But in my case, when I was in Puerto Rico, I did not have to do that. All I had to do was basically pay, for example, the deposit, and when the first month rent came, pay the first month rent, okay? But I didn't have to pay, for example, the last month's rent. So that's also super important. Now, there are other costs associated with actually getting an apartment that no one talks about. And that's basically, for example, you have the moving costs, both moving costs in and moving costs out. The first time, I basically did everything on my own. Basically, I brought my stuff from one country to the next country, and that was cool stuff. So much work. Second time, when I was basically moving into my another apartment, I was basically putting everything in my car, moving out. So much work. But when I moved over to my house, I was like, I am not doing this on my own again because it's so much work to move, and I hate it so much. So I got a friend to actually help me move, and I paid him some money, and that made the whole process a lot more easier. But depending, you can budget, for example, $200, $500 for moving costs. So keep that in mind. Maybe like a few hours of work. That way you don't have to do that much work whatsoever. On top of that, furniture. You know all that furniture your mom has, like the closet stuff, the thing that holds your clothes, the little cabinets. None of that stuff comes to the apartment sometimes. So that's all stuff you kind of have to budget for and actually buy, unless you're getting, for example, a fully furnished apartment. And sometimes it's worth the money if you don't want to actually buy furniture, end up selling furniture for like super cheap. By the way, stay away from Wayfair. Wayfair seems cheap, but Walmart is cheaper, okay? And IKEA is cheaper. So just get basic furniture. Only invest into expensive furniture once you know you're going to stay somewhere for a very long time and it actually makes sense. But for the most part, do not buy expensive furniture. On top of it, you have appliances. Like some places might have, for example, like a little stovetop, but they might not have an oven. They might not have, for example, everything you actually need in there. So budget appliances, the air fryer, the toaster, all those things, they don't come with apartments, okay? Also, you have to budget your first grocery, what is it called? First grocery list. And by the way, it is expensive because one thing I didn't take into account was basically when you get a fridge, there is nothing in there. So all the ketchups, the mayonnaise, the butter, the seasoning, the salt, the sugar, all those basic ingredients that you have in your mom's house, it's not there. So all those things you have to buy over, and those things are like $5 a pop, bro. So they cost some money. So you have to account for that, okay? So that's also super important. And also if you have a pet, there's also a pet fee. I highly recommend don't get a pet, okay? I had 2 cats and I gave one away, process of giving away the other one. And the thing is, you know, you usually think you want an animal and you might want an animal, but for me, for the most part, it's a big responsibility in the sense that it's not like I can't take care of it, but if I want to travel, what happens with the cat, okay? What happens with it, okay? If I want to do something, what happens with the cat? So for the most part, for me personally, I don't want any pets, not for a long time. Unless I find a place I'm going to be there for a long time. But yeah, pet fees, that's also a part of it if you want to have an animal in there. And there's also costs associated with that. So that's why I say maybe stay away from it, okay? But for the most part, here is the most important part of this video because it might cost you like a few $1,000s to save up this money. And by the way, when you're saving up this money, don't save up exactly what you need. You obviously want to have more than you need, okay? So that means have an emergency account for like at least 3 months or so, maybe 6 months. That way you say, hey, I'm moving out, I'm paying for the apartment, I have 1 month, 2 months, 3 months worth of my expenses. That way I can cover them if something happens and get a new job. That makes it a lot more stable, right? That makes a lot more sense, right? So that way it's not like you have what it takes to buy the thing or get the apartment, but you also have what it takes to get the apartment and also what it takes to actually maintain a lifestyle without work for 3 months or so. That's also super, super important. But the most important part, guys, is the apartment you get, don't get it based on what you're able to qualify for. That's terrible, okay? So they tell you you're able to qualify for an apartment that's like $2,000. Don't get that. Get one that's like 25% to 33% of your income. The lower, the better. When I got my first apartment, in all honesty, it was about, I think, let me do the math real quick. Let me see how much it was. My first apartment was about, let me run the math right now. It was about like 7.5% of my income, like less than 10%. I didn't want to spend any money on a rental. Like if I can get an apartment, it's nice, it's comfortable, but I don't want to spend extra money to have, for example, some luxurious view, to have this and that. It's okay to commute a little bit. It's okay to be a little further away. You have a car most likely, or you'll get a car most likely. So the idea is, be careful spending way too much money on rent. Rent is a service. Don't spend too much money there, because at the end of the day, you're supposed to be saving up to buy a home, and that's super, super important. And even if you're not going to buy a home, it's important to have extra money to invest and do everything else you need to do. Now, here is the last tip that I will tell you guys. Here are some mistakes I've made. When I was looking for an apartment, I was in a rush. I wanted to find a place very quickly, and I was willing to do anything that it took to basically get an apartment. That's very bad. That's not good, because automatically in negotiation, if you are the one that wants it the most, then you're like, you don't have the hand up, okay? So be patient. Be willing to wait, and be willing to look at other places. Don't fall in love with anybody's properties, not yours. You're just renting. Don't fall in love with a place. Don't get something too fancy. It makes no sense. Trust me. And on top of that, when you grow up and all this other stuff, okay, when it's time to buy a home, buy the home you need and buy it when you need it. Okay, I made a big mistake buying a property way too early, and I admit that. I admit that like 100%. I wish I would have just waited until I needed a property. I could have just invested that money and bought a property when I was like married or had some kids or whatever, because I really don't need it. It's like, so it's nice. It's good to have my own home and all that stuff, and I'm not gonna sell it right now. But the answer is like, it's not really needed. I could have just stayed renting for like a lot longer and basically bought the home when I was ready, and I could have used that money to buy some rental property or just invest. Okay, but that's my personal issue. So for you, for the most part, understand the cost it takes to actually get the apartment. Understand you want to have more money in there to take care of yourself, and understand, don't get something super fancy. Like, that's the main thing. I know people all the time, they make some good money, they get something crazy nice, they lose a job, they're back homeless with their parents, okay? You don't want to do that. Take your time, be smart. Remember, the goal, the objective is to be comfortable while you're saving up to buy a home, or you're basically investing and being pretty precise about that, okay, guys? But overall, guys, that is it for this video. Comment down below if it was helpful, and comment down below apartment so I know you made it all the way to the end of the video. And if you're 18 years old and you have good parents, there's healthy stuff, consider really not moving out until you're actually ready, until it actually makes sense. Pay off your student loan debt, save, invest, and then move out. Because when I moved out, I had enough money to buy a house. Okay, that's how cool it was, and that felt amazing. Now, I probably waited maybe like a year longer than I should have to move out, but it makes sense. That's the whole point, okay? But move out when you need to, okay? When it makes sense, when you have that feeling of I gotta go out there and get it. When you have like the apartment money, emergency money, and you build a good base, move out, okay? Go ahead, jump, all right? That's it. But guys, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, hit the bell to get notified. Up here is another video. Over here is my face. Subscribe, and as always, long-term team officially out.